In both Japan and in the West, Pluto firmly remains one of Naoki Urasawa's most popular works of all time, being an incredibly ambitious reimagining of the greatest robot on Earth, one of the most influential arcs from Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy. In part of Pluto's attempt to reimagine said arc from Astro Boy, it changed the protagonist to robot detective Gesicht, who only appeared in the original Astro Boy manga for a grand total of 7 pages. Even in the 1963 and 1980 anime adaptations, his screen time was similarly limited, and the 2003 anime adaptation actually omitted him entirely. Yet amongst Urasawa's protagonists, both puzzlingly and ironically, Gesicht is very much under-discussed. Among English-speaking audiences, you'll most often hear people talk about Dr. Tenma or Kenji. Meanwhile, within Japanese audiences, you'll hear greater discussion of the likes of Yaora and Taichi. So despite Pluto as a series being popular in both circles, Gesicht himself feels a fair bit forgotten somehow, and I felt that I needed to rectify that, since personally, Gesicht is easily one of my favorite Urasawa protagonists. His character is one you can examine through a number of different lenses. For instance, what it means to be human, the validity of artificial beings, and the way memories define people's existences, a topic also heavily explored in 20th Century Boys. But with Pluto not being a completely original work, its general story and its depiction of Gesicht, first and foremost, embody the same exact themes and ideas as Astro Boy. And Astro Boy itself was a story very much about pacifism and universal love, a story that denounced discrimination and promoted the peaceful coexistence and harmony of all people, irrespective of superficial differences like race or nationality. The greatest robot on Earth, meanwhile, was about the emptiness of conflict and war, with a hopeful message praying for the day that people stop fighting one another. So when I think of Pluto, and by extension when I think of Gesicht, I think of the dichotomy between love and hate. It should go without saying that the remainder of this video will contain spoilers for the entirety of Pluto. But with that in mind, let's get started. Gesicht's character fundamentally revolves around a love for family, and in large part because of it, also the cycle of hatred. With regards to the notion of familial love, almost all of Urasawa's stories have a substantial focus on family, Pluto being no exception. This is in large part a result of Urasawa's own experiences growing up, with him having been raised by his grandparents due to his parents' constant fighting. Urasawa has gone on record to say that manga was his way of coping with his familial troubles. So it is no surprise that given how significant of an issue family was for him growing up, that since the very beginning of his career, it has remained a consistently heavy focus in almost all of his series. In the end, Yaora, Master Keaton, and Mujirushi focus heavily on parent-child relationships, Happy focuses intently on sibling-sibling relationships, while Monster, 20th Century Boys, and Asadora focus on a mix of both. In Pluto as well, we also see a similar sort of mix. On one hand, there's some exploration of sibling-sibling relationships, like with Adam and Uran, and especially with Adolf Haas and his older brother. But the predominant focus of Pluto centers around parent-child relationships. We see this in Paul Duncan's story, Adam and Dr. Tenma's story, Adolf Haas's story to an extent, Brando's story, Sahad and Abula's story, Epsilon's story, and of course, Gesicht's story as well. This is all pretty interesting to look at when you consider that Urasawa became a father just a few years before he started serializing Pluto. And personally, I get the impression that Urasawa's feelings and experiences as a father tremendously shaped Pluto's writing, because virtually the entirety of the manga's story and Gesicht's character arc are centered around fatherhood specifically, with Gesicht coming to the conclusion that the joy of family and parenthood is what it means to be alive. As Urasawa alludes to in his own guidebook from 2016, throughout the series, Gesicht is constantly put in situations that juxtapose him with the idea of family or parenthood as he uncovers his memories bit by bit. Right at the beginning, Dr. Reinhardt begs Gesicht to get to the bottom of Montblanc's murder because Montblanc was effectively his son. The manga zooms in on Gesicht's somber expression, and then the very next page afterwards, Gesicht experiences his nightmare on Robita's death, signifying some sort of connection between himself and the idea of a father losing a child. Not too long later in the story, Gesicht meets Brando and his family. Brando and Gesicht have a pretty extensive conversation about family itself, with Brando mentioning that the entire world mourned Mont Blanc as if he were part of their family, regardless of him being a robot. And it is specifically there that Brando asks him if he has any children of his own, to which Gesicht very solemnly replies with no, all the while experiencing a sense of deja vu surrounding the scene wherein Gesicht first bought Robita for 500 Zeus. A little while later, when investigating his missing memories, he recalls a time during the 39th Central Asian War wherein a grieving father lamented that Thracia and its allies as troops had bombed innocent children in the name of bringing freedom and democracy to Persia. There again, you see the same sad expression on his face. Urasawa has gone on record numerous times to talk about how much emphasis he places on facial expressions in his own manga, despite it being antithetical to the historically predominant ethos of mangaka. In doing so, he extensively studied lots and lots of film in helping him depict his stories as characters. And I think the importance of and focus on facial expressions is most evident in Pluto and with his depiction of Gesicht. In fact, this topic is the primary focus of the Pluto chapter of Urasawa's guidebook from 2016, where Urasawa discussed how facial expressions were even more critical than usual for a manga like Pluto because of how so much of the cast was not human. One interesting thing of note from this chapter is how the interviewer and Urasawa both highlight how in German, the word Gesicht roughly translates over to face or facial expression. So it is incredibly fitting how much of Pluto's story and how so much of Gesicht's character come not from the text, but from his face. Even after Gesicht mostly recovers his memories, the sustained focus on his facial reactions in situations concerning parenthood continues. At every point in the story, he continues to find himself in situations connecting him to the concept of parenthood. Once he uncovers the truth behind Abel and Pluto, he treats Sahad with incredible kindness, refusing to badmouth him to those that knew him, refusing orders to kill him, and refusing to even so much as consider him an enemy. This is in large part because he recognized that Sahad was a child failed by his father, and also because he connected with Sahad at a personal level. Adam said it himself in his dying message, that Pluto and Gesicht were exactly the same. How specifically were they the same? Because of the actions they had taken as a result of family-driven hate. Which leads me into the next part of this analysis. It is precisely because of Gesicht's deep love for his child Robita that he ultimately ends up doing the unfathomable and kills a human being. As per the robot laws in the world of Astro Boy and Pluto, robots cannot harm human beings. They are not programmed to do so. The act of a robot killing someone, let alone doing so out of hate, is inconceivable. The fact that Gesicht was able to do so was a sign that robots had become too human. This is especially evident in the context of the prior exchange between Adam and Dr. Chanomizu on Brow 1589's murder incident. The implication of their conversation was that Brow's act of killing was not a matter of an AI defect, but rather the opposite. He killed precisely because his AI was perfect, a perfect simulation of a human being. In other words, the act of killing and the act of hatred are innately human flaws. Part and parcel of what it means to be human is the capacity to feel love, but conversely, the potential to be led astray into hatred. And this hatred was something that Gesicht was both very ashamed of and also very fearful of, knowing full well the devastating consequences of its spreading. One of the most memorable parts of the entirety of Pluto is Gesicht's words to Adolf Haas after he saves him from the KR's assassins. "Mr. Haas, there's something I want to ask you. Does the hatred you humans feel ever disappear? Or does it never go away, no matter how many times you try to erase it? What I am most afraid of is myself, now that I've learned how to hate." And these heart-shattering words fundamentally define Gesicht's character for what it is. A character revolving around the dichotomy between love and hate, a love for family, and yet also a burning hatred for whoever would take that away. He's a character who, despite being a robot, was truly able to feel both of these powerful emotions for himself, the latter of which he was completely and utterly terrified of. And this was true to the bitter end. Gesicht died because of Abula and Pluto's hatred, and when he met his ultimate demise, the two things he immediately thought of were love for his family vis-a-vis Ali's similarity to Robita, and also seemingly a writhing hatred, despite knowing full well just how vile such an emotion was. His final words before passing was that nothing comes from hatred, a lesson that Gesicht learned the hard way, and also a message that both Adam and Sahad later took to heart. Really, the whole series revolves around this perpetual cycle of hatred and pain. From the KR, to the robots who went off to war, to Abula and Sahad, to Adolf and his brother, to none other than Gesicht and Adam. And the ultimate message of the series is a hopeful one of pacifism, praying for the day that, one day, all this pointless hatred and violence and bloodshed and war will cease to exist. The same exact message that Tezuka sought to convey in Astro Boy. Will the day hatred disappears ever truly come? We don't know. We can only hope and pray that that day will come when all of us sever ourselves from the chains of hatred. Now, Astro Boy itself was a story that Tezuka had conceived of precisely because of his experiences during and after the Second World War, the turning point of which was an incident wherein an American soldier punched Tezuka in the face when he was working at a hospital. It was specifically that incident that made him ask himself how two people who are entirely identical can fight one another, can go to war with one another. Is this conflict over superficial differences like race or nationality or language just human nature? The whole notion of what it means to be human is something that both Tezuka and Urasawa have explored in a number of their stories time and time again. In Urasawa's case, he did this pretty extensively in Monster, 20th Century Boys, and even Mujirushi to an extent with his depiction of a certain political leader. Tezuka, meanwhile, explored his own definition of humanity not only in Astro Boy, but also in a number of his other works, including the likes of Dororo, and of course his magnum opus, Phoenix. Pluto may be a reimagining of the greatest robot on Earth, but in truth, it takes heavy inspiration not just from Astro Boy, but really from Tezuka's entire bibliography, and the one work Urasawa has repeatedly cited as having completely changed his life is none other than Phoenix, Tezuka's magnum opus, his deeply existential and career-defining series about the dichotomy between life and death, love and hate, as well as humanity and inhumanity. And all of these dichotomies are at the heart of Gesicht's character. Because of that, I think there's a pretty fair argument for people to make that Gesicht's character is more inspired by Osamu Tezuka's Phoenix than Astro Boy, especially the future and resurrection arcs of Phoenix. After all, Gesicht hardly appears in any version of Astro Boy, and the basis for much of his character arc in Pluto is from ideas seen throughout Phoenix. For instance, the whole notion of understanding what it means to live. Heck, Gesicht's child Robita is actually originally from those volumes of Phoenix, and not from Astro Boy at all. And the resurrection arc especially is where this concept of murder equating to humanity and human nature originally comes from. Robita's story in this arc is about proving its own humanity despite having a robot body, and to do so, it kills a human being, arguing that because it feels hatred, which a robot should not possibly be able to feel, that it is human. And in Pluto, that ties in with how both Gesicht and Brow 1589 were consumed by hatred, and how because of that, they killed human beings. Not because of imperfections in their AI, but rather because of the opposite, indicating that hatred, violence, and murder were innately human. But all in all, Gesicht's character is one that I see through two lenses. First, from the standpoint of family and fatherhood, and second, from the standpoint of the cycle of hatred. All these years later, how do you view the character of Gesicht? And where does he rank for you among your favorite Urasawa protagonists? Please let me know in the comments. But with that in mind, I'll see you next time.